onto his back. There are reports that Mr. Manny James was shot in front of his young child. Is this accurate? In front of his family members and other individuals within the community. Is this accurate, sir?
I am not 100% sure about that.
Okay, so the question is, what's the plan with regards to law enforcement now that we haven't used rubber bullets? This is my final question. I'll pass it to my colleague. But we haven't used rubber bullets this time. We've used live bullets. What's the position with the Commissioner of Police with regards to the police officer that fired these shots? What's going to be happening with that situation? And since Manny was not found with any weapon, there's not a warrant out for his arrest, what would be the justification for this 45-year-old man, of a father of two, losing his life, sir?
Well, you asked me a question, what's the position of the Commissioner of Police? Clearly, I cannot speak for the Commissioner of Police where this particular question is concerned. But as I mentioned, this matter will be investigated quite transparently. I outlined the procedure that will be followed in terms of a coroner's inquest. And responsible members from the citizens of Antigua and Barbuda will be members of that jury. And all those persons who are available who have witnessed what transpired, is to just give the police a call. My number is 464-5599, or the CID 462-3913 or 3914.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'm not sure if you're aware of the Bruce Greenaway situation and the verdict on that and how the public feels about it. So I think that the police force would need to work to gain even more interest now that we've lost an individual, that no weapons were found on him. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
All right, thanks. Nikki Phoenix. Nikki Phoenix is with, as we said, ZDK. Let's go down to Robert Emmanuel, who is with Observer Media Group. Good morning, Robert. Your questions, please. There's also Alicia George, who will take right after you as well on this. Go ahead, Robert. Thanks.
Good morning, Superintendent. Good morning, Minister Nicholas. My main question, considering most have been answered already by my colleagues, but why did the police shoot Mr. James in the back, or at least had aimed for his midriff area, rather than in his leg to try and incapacitate him? As you said, there was no weapon found on his person prior or during the event.
Well, though, as I mentioned, the matter is being handled by a very professional team from the homicide unit. And that question that you just asked, those will be revealed during the course of the investigations.
Oh, okay, no problem. My second question was in regards for the video itself. Not taking too much into it, or not reading too much into it, one of the main questions that came out of it was the way that Mr. James was carried into the back of the police truck. It seemed to be a bit rough, in my estimation, in terms of how the police handled him. Would you agree with that? And why was an ambulance call, or was first aid administered to Mr. James at the scene at the time?
Okay, well, I have seen the video and there are some concerns. Those matters are presently being investigated. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that the ambulance was summoned to the scene. But at the end of the day, even though a person was shot during the course of any operation, the police main focus is really and truly to ensure that person's life is preserved and take him to the nearest hospital as soon as practicable. And I believe that the police perhaps have done the right thing in those circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Thank you for that. My final question, and I'm going to go back a bit to my first one, but let's first assume that Mr. James did have a weapon. We know that he didn't prior, well now, but assuming that Mr. James did have a weapon, is it normal for police to engage in shooting during a residential area where it was very clear from the video that persons were outside the area taking videos? Is that a normal police practice? Or is there something else that could have been done in that situation?
Well, I believe both of us have seen the same video. We saw a trace, but the end product of the video, none of us really know what transpired. But as I mentioned, those are circumstances that we are presently investigating, and the truth behind those things will reveal during the course of our investigations.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. I'll
Yes.
hand it over to my colleagues
You're most
for their
welcome.
questioning.
All right, Robert, thanks. Well, we're joined by two other journalists as well. There is Kieran Murdoch from Twin Island Media. There is also Alicia George from Island Press Box. All right, I'm hoping I'm still correct with Island Press Box, Alicia. Let's go over to you, and then we'll take Kieran from Twin Island Media. So, Alicia, your questions, please, on this specific subject.
Hi, Garfield. Just a point of clarification. I'm not here actively because the live is not on Facebook. I have to participate on the back end on Skype, so you can put Kieran on this one.
Didn't quite hear what you said.
Yes, I'm wondering. I think she's just saying that she's recording. Kieran Murdoch from Twin Island Media. I just wanted to put in a question. I'm not sure if it's already been asked, and forgive me if it has. To get from the police whether or not in the coordination of their policy at any point in time over the last few years they have considered the issue of using body camera. In many countries around the world, generally, when you have these sorts of controversies as to you're questioning whether or not the right procedure was followed, did an officer do what was right, and you want to establish exactly what went on, what obviously helps in that instance is that an officer may have been wearing a body camera, and so it doesn't have to become a he said, she said, who reported these facts, who reported different facts. It's actually on camera for all to see. So the question will be asked whether or not the force has body cameras available and under what circumstances officers are required to wear them.
I have no difficulty where the usage of body cameras are concerned, but I am not 100% sure whether or not the legislation has passed for us to start wearing those type of cameras. But I have been in the business of policing for the past 34 years, and I know the spin sometimes people normally put when police are conducting their investigations. And I am one of those officers who shall be happy when those come into, to be. I have absolutely no problem with it.
Yeah, because it protects both sides. For instance, if I were to have an interaction with the police and I misrepresent what happened, the police would then go and say, well, here, look at the footage. This is exactly what took place. So that was my question. I just wanted to touch on that issue of body cameras. I think Mr. Emmanuel would have covered a number of issues that I would have also gone into, so I won't labor it too much. Just to, and forgive me if the question has already been asked, but just to understand, do we have clarity on whether or not the gentleman was armed at the time that he was shot? I got the sense that he wasn't, but could you clarify that?
I know for a fact that someone was armed in the vehicle because that vehicle was shot at the police. And there is no dispute about it. As to who had the firearm, I really and truly can't say.
Okay. And are you able to say at this point if it was the officer or the defense force officer who would have fired that fatal shot?
I'm not 100% sure who fired the shot.
Okay. All right. And my understanding from what you've been saying so far is that clearly there's an internal investigation ongoing
Yes.
within the police force to bring some establishment of what went on. I believe, is that being led by your internal investigations unit, your homicide investigators? What's happening there? And forgive me if I'm going over.
This matter is presently being handled by the Serious Crime Unit, which is basically the homicide unit responsible for those type of offenses.
Okay, excellent. All right, I'll leave it there, folks. Garfield, over to you.
All right, thanks, Kieran.
Garfield, just let me bring
Sure.
a bit of clarity on the question of the legislation.
Sure.
I believe I would have indicated on a previous program that the whole question of incorporating body cams and, of course, the surveillance cameras that we have just renovated on around St. John's and are hoping to expand. The legislation has to be prepped in order for that to be formally a part of the prosecution from the police force. It's not yet a part of the legislation, and so it is under review at the moment. I believe the Attorney General's chambers are actually drafting the necessary regulations to amend the criminal procedures detailing that type of evidentiary information. So it is pending. It would have been reported again in the media that a benevolent citizen would have made a gift of some body cameras to the police force, but as yet they cannot be deployed and used as part of the evidence because the legislation does not support it, and the government is giving active consideration for it, and the legislation and change in regulations are being now prepped by the Attorney General's chambers.
Minister, just a follow-up on that question before I come over to Superintendent Michael. The instance of former MP for St. George, Dean Jonas's arrest, was the policeman using a body camera then? And if so, was it a premature use of it?
I can't speak with any degree of clarity, but what we can say is that the video that was circulated seemed to have been in close proximity to the activities of the police, and it may well have been that if a body camera was used, the footage would have been leaked and what would have ended up in the public domain. But certainly that would have been an irregular occurrence, and certainly there is no legislative or regulatory framework for that type of evidence to be utilized in criminal proceedings.
All right, thanks, Minister. Thanks for that clarity. Over to Superintendent Michael. Superintendent Michael, just quickly, what vehicle was it that were driving? The three gentlemen, the three men who were running from the police. What vehicle was it?
It was a white Vitara, Suzuki Vitara.
Okay. Do we know at what point Mr. James was shot?
Honestly, I can't say.
One of the videos from the incident when he was being chased on foot by the soldier and police, there's a single shot that can be heard in that video. Do we know if that was the shot that eventually killed him?
That I can't say.
Okay. But he was shot twice, you're saying, based on the initial...
Based on our examination, yes.
Okay. Based on the police's use of force policy, from what you have seen so far, obviously this is a matter that is being investigated, but based on the police's use of force policy, was there anything irregular about the fact that he was shot in the back?
As I mentioned, I don't know at what point he was shot. Bear in mind, based on information received, the shooting incident start from Grey Hill, right down to where the vehicle stopped. So I just can't say exactly when he was shot. But I know when the shooting incident started and when it had finished. So it can be between those 2 points.
Okay. Superintendent Michael, in terms of the investigative machinery and mechanism within the force to investigate the use of force, separate from this being a serious crime, is there like an inspectorate of the police force that investigates, in other words, the actions of its own members in these cases? And secondly, has the weapon, or have both weapons, because I figure that both the police and the soldier had a weapon, have both weapons been seized for ballistic investigation and evidence?
Apart from what the serious crime unit is doing, we also have a unit that we call Office of Professional Standard. So it is a case. I'm not sure if what the commissioner may do in those circumstances. I mean, answering to the question with respect to both firearms, yes, they are now in the possession of the police.
And
both firearms, yes.
Okay, good. And did on Monday night, was it a case on Monday night where members of this Office of Professional Responsibility, which essentially is akin to a kind of inspectorate, were members of that team on the scene to conduct initial investigations?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Is that a concern for you, though, that it's unclear if they were on the scene?
Yes.
No, is that a concern for you that it's
I'm
unclear?
not sure if they were on the scene.
Okay, okay. All right, fair enough. And a final question on this, Superintendent Michael.
Bear in mind, even though the department, the serious crime unit, is investigating any breaches of a serious nature where this incident is concerned, they also can bring disciplinary charges against any member as well.
Right. And a final question. Does the procedure entail, in those circumstances when there's a controversial shooting, police shooting, or the circumstances are controversial, does the procedure entail taking the particular officer? I know that you can't act in relation to the soldier because that's the defense force, but does that involve taking the officer off frontline duty? And has the officer been taken off frontline duty?
I know for a fact that both officers, circumstances like this, they usually seek counseling. That is the first thing. So obviously, in order to seek counseling, they have to be taken off frontline duties. So that has been done as we speak.
Okay. And the officer who was involved in this particular incident, the one who was chasing on foot, what rank is he?
Constable.
A constable. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Michael. Really appreciate it. Superintendent Lisbourne Michael. Over back to Minister Nicholas, if he has any closing comments on this particular segment. Minister, back over to you.
Not at all. I just wish to thank Superintendent Lisbourne Michael for the time he has spent with us and the effort that he has put into bringing some clarity to this particular matter. And we thank the journalists as well for their questions. And hopefully we can have some ongoing responsible treatment of this particular issue. Not forgetting that the police has an overall responsibility of keeping the society as a whole safe. So I want to thank you very much, Superintendent Michael, for taking the time out to be with us. And again, this represents the approach that the administration that I have to be a part of has taken in all public matters. So I want to thank you for readily consenting to be here and to take the questions and provided the responses that you have. So again, I'm obliged now to take the rest of the proceedings and to face the music myself, amongst the other questions. So
You're
thank
most
you very
welcome,
much for
Mr.
being here.
Minister.
All right?
And to you, Mr. Burford.
Really appreciate it, Superintendent Michael. And if I may say, you acquitted yourself quite forcefully. Back over to Minister.
Yes.
Okay, Minister.
Sure, okay, Mr. Michael.
Okay, so we will, of course, be switching now to the other elements of the post-cabinet media briefing, in which Minister will talk about the other elements that here are on the notes. Of course, we will have separate questions on those matters. Back over to you, Minister.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Garfield. And again, thank you to the media panel that is here. I wanted to spend a little bit on the issue, the second point on the issue that has to do with the recent actions of the UK government to ask citizens of the Commonwealth of Dominica to be able to need visa access for entry into the UK as a result of perceived security risks that the travel from Dominica, persons with Dominican passports is perceived to present to the UK officials. This is not a new issue. I believe very early on in this term, it could have been, my mind is a bit hazy on exactly the timeline, but it's certainly within a few months ago, where the EU had indicated that the EU Parliament was prepared to look at all of the CIP programs globally. And in fact, they had discontinued the equivalent of the CIP programs in a few of the British dependencies, to include Malta. Antigua took a position, and I believe it was enunciated on this particular program, where the Prime Minister and the head of our CIP unit, Ms. Charmaine Donovan, had made themselves available for both a meeting with the UK team, and of course the US as well, we had made it very clear in those circumstances that the CIP program in Antigua had in fact been put in a different category to the rest of the other CIP programs operating within the CARICOM region, certainly within the OECS. We had 2 additional layers of security where we have not only to the Caribbean impacts, but as well through the US scrutiny. Both those units scrutinize the application process. And so we have a filtration system that we think is very thorough, and that separates us from a number of the other CIP programs within the Caribbean. And we had actually said that we were moving to ensure that we could act in concert, in harmony with other OECS territories, because we felt that even though Antigua could justifiably distinguish ourselves, that as a brand, CIP in the Caribbean was seen as one brand, and we could not escape that. And so accordingly, we wanted to work collaboratively with the other CIP programs within the region. Having said that, and having regard to the fact that Dominica has now come up under this audit, and of course more recently, the Prime Minister of Dominica, the Honorable Roosevelt Skerrit, has moved within their parliament to seek to amend some of their practices and regulations. It's a positive thing. What I find disappointing and disingenuous is that there are members from the opposition here in Antigua who know better, because we have made this thing a public matter, and it is on the record, and I'm going to be obliged to go into the archives of ABS and to resurface that discourse that we had on a similar program like this to indicate the position that Antigua had taken a few months back. And that when one of the operatives of the opposition is on another media house indicating that Dominica is seeking to move their program in a positive direction, and what is the government of Antigua and Barbuda doing, that is disingenuous, and it's deceitful, and it's designed to pull this country down, because we are already in a much better position. We are far in advance. And again, it is not to necessarily bring Dominica into any odium, but it's to say that we saw that as a risk several months ago, and we even called for a regional approach towards the CIP program. The operative for the United Progressive Party knows better, ought to have known better, and is doing a disservice to this particular situation and to the country. So having regard to that, we will continue to present ourselves to the international community, to the EU, to the UK, to Canada, and to all of our stakeholder and participating countries, whether or not at some future point in time the EU brings to an end the professional Schengen, not professional, the preferential treatment of the Schengen visa access to their countries, whether or not it comes to an end, that would not be as a result for any acts of omission or commission that would have been done by our CIP program. So I want to make it very clear that that is the position the Antiguan government is taking out, and we do still believe that even with all that is taking place, that there is an opportunity for us to continue to distinguish ourselves and to ensure that none of these participation countries sees Antigua as an ongoing risk to their own immigration and border management systems. There are other matters that the Cabinet would have looked at yesterday. Clearly, the government of the day, and of course the government of the day is populated by the party in power, and clearly with the pending by-elections that are due in St. Mary's South, it is a matter of public record that the Antigua Labour Party has taken the position upon the resignation of the Honorable Samantha Marshall from seeking to contest that by-election, that we have another candidate. And as is our want to do, is to give full support to that particular candidate. The Cabinet would have supported the recommendation from the Prime Minister to elevate Mr. Dwayne George to the position of the Senate, and that position has already been made vacant by the elevation of Mr. Gardner to a diplomatic position in the office in Washington, where he will undergo not only exposure in the diplomatic corps, but he has an opportunity to further his studies abroad. And of course, we're seeking to build up capacity for future appointments in other areas in the Foreign Service. So those two twin developments have been detailed in the notes as we have presented them under the pen of the Chief of Staff. I would want to leave it there because a whole hour has already passed, and I wanted to give the journalists here present an opportunity to point questions for clarity and for further information as you deem fit and necessary. Over to you, Garfield.
All right, thanks, Minister, for of course, the preamble to the second half of our media briefing. With your leave, Minister, it is quite possible that because of the extended time so far, that we could have about 3 questions for each reporter to ensure that we can, for each reporter, so that way we can come out by 10:30. Is that fine with you as well?
That's okay.
Okay, so 3 questions for each, so especially because we have 5 journalists who are asking questions. I just realized that Alicia is not in a position to ask questions. I think she's just recording. Is that right, Alicia? Did I get you correctly, or do you want to ask questions in this segment? All right, I think Alicia.
No,
sorry, you're still recording? Okay, good, all right.
Yes.
Okay,
still
thank you.
recording.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. All right, so let's go now. This time we'll switch around the order of the questioners. We'll start with, we ended with Kieron. We'll start with Kieron in this one. Then we'll go to Robert Emmanuel. Then we'll go to, I think, don't quite remember the order after that. But then we go to Elizabeth, then Nikki, then Zoe. So let's start with Kieron. Kieron, go ahead, please. 3 questions, please. I will ask you to confine to those.
No problem. Kieran Murdoch, Twin Island Media. Minister, on the issue which you were just speaking about, which is the Citizenship by Investment program, are you able to say, or is the government able to say at this time, to what extent there is any indication, or solid indication from the UK or the EU that we will lose visa-free access? I ask that because obviously there's a lot of information, speculation going left, going right. We know what has happened in Dominica, but I haven't necessarily seen a clear indication from the UK government or the EU that, hey, Antigua or anybody else will also face this action at this particular time. Of course, the government may be privy to information which maybe the public has not had the benefit of yet. So has there been any solid indication from UK authorities or EU authorities that, I don't know, that we are on a declining timetable as to the loss of that privilege, or has no such indication been made?
The short answer is no, Kieran, and as I've indicated, we are actively engaged. I believe both the Prime Minister and Ms. Donovan would have made themselves available for review by members of these particular countries, certainly the European Union Commission, to be able to look into the security arrangements with us. And we are satisfied that we will meet any requirement, any test for security and to eliminate risks to these particular countries. So we are satisfied that we have done the work, and that is one of the hallmarks of our program, is that it guarantees countries who we're doing business with that our program is more secure. And we do not take those other chances that other jurisdictions may not have been paying attention to. So there is no indication that we are under any timeline for decline, and it may well be that ultimately they will make that decision in the end and say it doesn't matter, but then that again is outside of our control. But so far as within our sphere of influence is concerned, we are ensuring that we engage and we demonstrate the appropriate security measures that we have in place that will cause them to look at us in a more favorable light.
Okay. I just have 2 more questions. Both will be on the CIP. The first is, I noted a recent release coming out of the EU Parliament, which spoke generally to citizenship programs broadly across the world and certain stipulations which they would hope that programs meet. And one of them was that in the marketing of citizenship programs, that the marketing material does not specifically refer to passports and emphasize that this passport gives you visa-free access. So essentially, to speak in layman's terms, they would prefer that a citizenship program market citizenship and not necessarily, have an ad that, or persons who are marketing agents have ads that say, hey, get a passport from such and such a country and you get visa-free access to the UK, you get visa-free access to the EU, you get visa-free access here. They seem to take a particular issue with that kind of marketing. So I'm wondering whether or not there's been a conversation at the cabinet level about ensuring that agents and third parties who are involved in our citizenship program abide by those stipulations. I remember there was an incident some time ago where we had an agent here in Antigua who produced a video that the citizenship unit took particular offense to because it was along those lines. Is buy a passport, buy it for this amount, it gives you visa-free access here. And that sort of marketing was seen as vulgar.
Yes, the short answer to your question is yes. We have been so notified and the request has been made that any particular marketing of the program that seeks to emphasize and highlight visa-free access to the Schengen territory be suppressed. And so we are taking the appropriate actions in that respect, yes.
Okay. And I'm asking a question now on behalf of my colleague, Elisha George. The former head of the CIP fell out of favor with the government when he suggested that CIP funds be placed in the Treasury and not a separate account. It says today the British government is making the same demand, which the government is being asked to comply with. Do you see the position of the former head of the program as being vindicated? And how does the government feel about this and its plan for the future changes to the CIP?
I think we're splitting hairs. There are two operating accounts from the CIP. One that has to do with the funding of the operations of the CIP program itself, having to pay the employees of the Citizens by Investment Unit and to take general care of that administration. The other one goes into the NDF, and the NDF falls under the control of the Treasury. So I'm not sure what are we splitting hairs about. The head of the Treasury, Mr. Ickford Roberts, is the principal signatory to the NDF account. And again, the way that the funds are allocated, they are allocated as would any fund that's available to the government. In the case of the consolidated fund, that again would be a part of the budgetary procedures that are approved by Parliament in the first instance. And there are provisions within the allocation and use of funds where through the ministerial program, if there are any other expenditure that is required outside of what is normally budgeted for, then we use a series of special warrants, which again has to go back to the Parliament for approval. So I'm not sure what becomes of that. These are internal matters, internal control matters. And I can assure you and anyone else who asks that every single dime of monies that are collected under the CIP program are accounted for. As a matter of fact, on a regular 6-month basis, the use of those resources are accounted for in Parliament. So there is no subterfuge, there is no wise that the resources that are gathered from the CIP programs can be, there is any question that can be asked about to what purpose and to what end were they used for. It's a question of administrative convenience internally that the program has been set up that way. And I just want to assure the public that every single dime from the CIP, since it has come into operation, is accounted for. And there are many times where even the public gets involved, having seen the detail, and have asked questions about a particular line item, and those justifications are granted. So it is not a secret. The Parliament has access to all of this foundation information when the reporting system is put into effect.
Thank you, Minister. Garfield, over to you.
Thanks, Kieron, and of course, thank you so much for sticking to the 3 questions. Back over to Robert Emmanuel. Robert, your 3 questions, please.
Good day again, Minister Nicholas.
Good morning,
so
Robert.
my first question, just sticking on the CIP line of questioning, is the government thought about any alternative plans in case, and this might be a long way down, but in case the CIP, let's say the UK or the EU decide for whatever to continue the line of pursuit against the CIP in the region. So in terms of alternative forms of revenue.
Well, for anyone who is discerning and would have paid attention to the annual budget debates and discussions that we have had, again, this government being as transparent as it is, has always made it clear that our tax revenue base is far from adequate. The medium position that we ought to be in, it's 25% of our GDP ought to be able to come from our tax base. And we are some 9 percentage points away from that. We're operating in the 16% quartile. It does mean that the non-taxable revenues that comes from the CIP program have in fact given us that buttress that allowed us to be able to fund a lot of the developments that we have in place, including the improvement to our education system, the infrastructure for education, the improvement to our healthcare system and the infrastructure for healthcare, and even the whole question of the infrastructure with roads and the other facilities that go along with that. Even as we're looking at diversifying our water production capabilities, a lot of the resources that we get from the CIP has been allocated to those measures. So it certainly acts as budgetary support in those instances. The question you're asking, at what point in time, should there come a point in time when we no longer have that volume of revenues coming from the CIP, what will the government do? In fact, what we are doing actually is seeking to continually diversify the economic base to ensure that we have a wider base of a taxation. The Prime Minister would have indicated in his last budget presentation that we would have indeed clawed back the losses that we sustained to the GDP in the years of COVID. And in fact, the last 2 years' growth has been able to allow us to claw back some of that position. While tourism continues to be the mainstay of our economy, and we will continue to expand and improve the economic base in the tourism sector, we still need to have other sectors performing. And that is why we have made attempts at diversifying the economy in several other areas. One of the areas that I do know that there is significant potential in the next 2 operational years would be in the whole question of logistics at the port. We have spent significant sums of money, upwards of $97 million in renovating our cargo port. And we see that as presenting us with some opportunities to play a greater role in the movement of goods across the ports in this part of the world. And we are hoping to upgrade, continue to upgrade that facility and to attract investments that will allow us to be able to have our port of St. John's act as a transshipment port. There are many countries in the world, Singapore for example, where a significant portion of their revenues comes from the movement of cargo through their ports. And so we have that opportunity. But there are several other areas where we can look towards expanding our economy, even in terms of health, even in terms of education. We are pumping $80 million into the University of the West Indies, Five Island campus. And that will ensure that when it is complete, we will be able to attract not 1,000 students, but upwards of 5,000 students. I've already indicated that one of the things that the APOA is going to do is to seek to move a production of water, increase water in that particular area, in the Yeptons area, such that we can meet that future demand. And what that is going to mean is that there's going to be increased economic opportunity as a result of the university city. And as a result of that, we are expecting that we will increase our tax base that way as well. So there are a number of factors. And I mean, I can't sit here in a half-an-hour program and list them all for you, Robert. But the question would be, how do we get to that position where we are getting better yield from the tax base, even as we expand the economy? And so we are going to have to seek to improve the yield at customs. We are going to have to improve the yield from inland revenue. Already we have tied the property tax system into the inland revenue, and over the next year we are implementing new IT measures within inland revenue to make them more efficient and effective in tax collections. And we certainly think that one of the areas where there is a significant avoidance of taxes is in the area of property tax. And so we are paying particular attention to that, even as we amended the Registered Land Act in Parliament last week. We will ensure that all of the lands that are either part of leases or freehold ownership in Barbuda will also fall under the tax system. So we're seeking to improve the tax collection mechanisms even as we go along, not in anticipation of the decline of the CIP, but in adjacent to it as well.
Thank you so much for that answer, Mr. Nicholas. Moving on to the cabinet notes, I would like to get some clarity onto point 5. The cabinet welcomed 2 lawyers from the Ministry of Legal Affairs to address an issue relating to an obligation to a security firm which the government still owes. How much exactly was the amount owed to this security firm? And if you could you name the security firm in that answer? And can you also clarify, and this is adjacent to it, the point about Ministry of Works personnel being employed as security for government buildings and schools? Can you just expound upon it a bit? Thank you.
The issue of the claim is in excess of $1 million. And the personnel from the legal affairs were certainly called into being because this was as a result of a judgment against the government. And so that is the clarity that was required, whether or not and why were the what was the impact of this claim against the government and whether or not the charges were legitimate. So we are going to be obliged to honor the claim and honor the charges. And so I don't think anything is going to come from a disclosure on who the particular security firm is, but it's not available to me at this particular point in time. All that I do know is that at the time when the claim was brought against the government, we needed to have legal certainty as to whether or not it was a valid claim and as whether or not the baseline charges were indeed valid, and the legal personnel was able to give affirmation to both requests. With respect to, what was the other question you asked, Robert?
It was in regards to the other part of point 5. It says the cabinet has therefore moved to ensure that security provided to more government buildings and schools are to be carried out by trained personnel from the Ministry of Works. Can you just expound on that point? What is the sort of plan that the government has for these trained personnel from the Ministry of Works?
Well, a significant portion of the monthly operating budget for the government is allocated to paying for security. And most of these security contracts are outsourced, even here at ABS. And it does have the effect of accruing significant liabilities for the government. And so we are in a constant search in terms of how to get to that optimal position that we can bring these measures under control. Some of the areas that we are looking at is more electronic surveillance. And of course, there can be no true surveillance system that is 100% automated electronically. There still has to be a blend and a hybrid between manned surveillance and electronic surveillance. And so we're looking at managing these costs downwards. And one of the ways that we are contemplating it is whether or not we can deploy more personnel from the Public Works Department in some instances to be able to get a better control of costs.
Thank you so much for that question. And my final question on this point, my third question, is in regards to the early discussion we have with the supervisor, the police commissioner, the supervisor, Is it time for the government to consider whether to consider the use of body cameras, and are we pushing for that, as well as an independent commission to investigate these sort of matters or complaints against the police? Because as we know, the police could investigate these issues, and we could say that the police have done a full investigation and they have done all they could do to investigate their officers. But there will always be questions in the public's eyes as it relates to matters of police abuses or procedures that may have been wrong for them to use at the time. So
I believe the superintendent did acquit himself in respect of what is going to happen with this investigation. And I think we have to stay on that matter and perhaps maybe get a bit more acquainted with it to understand the ramifications. Where he speaks of the coroner's inquest into this particular matter and the fact that there will be empaneled a set of citizens to act as jurors in this whole matter, I think that brings a degree of civilian engagement in the whole process as a measure of oversight and protection for the public. And I think we'll have to give that process an opportunity to yield some results. I think in every single instance where there is police action, the normal reaction from the public, based on what they can see, is a state of alarm. But I think as we understand there is complexity in police work, these things will have to be held in a way that we preserve the security mechanisms in the country, while at the same time protecting citizens from any injudicious actions by the police. They're humans, and one can extrapolate into think that there can be errors by the police, but I think we'll have to pay attention to the procedure that was outlined by Mr. Michael a moment ago. And in respect of the question about the body cams, as I've indicated, the Attorney General's chambers is in fact reviewing the legislation and regulations governing the use of body cameras and even the surveillance cameras that we have in and around St. John's as part of evidentiary procedures in respect of prosecution of crime. So again, it's a question of time, and we have to be very careful about how we move ahead in these particular procedures, but I can give you the assurance that it is under active consideration excuse me, by the government, and the cabinet has already discussed it and has already given assent for the Attorney General's chamber to complete the internal review, and then we will certainly have a presentation in Parliament where we can discuss it and hopefully have it enacted and it becomes a regular part of prosecution and crime management going forward.
thank you so much, sir. I'll hand it over to Garfield for his and the rest of my colleagues. Apologies. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Robert. Let's go now over to Elizabeth Fain. Elizabeth is with Pointville Communications. Good morning again, Elizabeth. Your 3 questions separately, please.
Yes, my 3 short questions. The first question being, Minister Nicholas, has the electronic travel requirement for persons traveling to the United Kingdom, citizens of Antigua and Barbuda, has that taken effect?
It is a global, yes it has, and it is a global requirement. It is not to be seen as a visa requirement. More recently, Canada did also put their ETA into operation. And while it has in fact been done on a selective basis from Canada, and Antigua has been included in one of those countries where their citizens can use the Canadian ETA to enter Canada, as opposed to the more stringent visa restrictions that they had in place just prior to them implementing that. During COVID, I can recall that Jamaica was one of those countries that we were certainly modeling in respect of border entry. And they had, in fact, put an electronic travel request platform in place. So before you actually entered Jamaica, you had to complete that, and then you had to be accepted as being a valid person that they will accept into their territory, even before they did the whole question of your vaccine or COVID status. So this is going to become regular practice across, it's going to become a global procedure that is going to be adopted by all countries, Antigua included, where before you set off to enter the country, you will have to give an indication as to your purposes, where you're going to stay, all of that. And it's going to enhance border management and security for every particular receiving country. But there is no visa requirement that has been put in place by the UK towards our citizens here, but the ETA is certainly applicable from the moment that they initiated it.
Thank you. The Honorary Consul for Guyana to Antigua and Barbuda made a clarion call for the government and stakeholders of Inter-Caribbean to address the problem of constant delays, overbookings, leaving passengers stranded, and there is little to no compensation for this, or word from the management of Inter-Caribbean. What are you aware of this, and what is the approach of the government? And on the heels of that, in light of that, could you expound on where the discussions are right now with the negotiations of LIAT 2020 and its commencement, so that intra-regional travel can be, dealt with in a way that the capacity is once again held, brought to a level of adequacy for passengers throughout the region?
It's a good question. Yes, we have seen the commentary, and I believe at an early juncture in the Parliament, I did express some of my own concerns because I've had a pretty bad experience with that particular carrier as well, traveling across the Caribbean. Certainly, inter-Caribbean travel is not as predictable as it once was when LIAT 1974 Limited was at its apogee, at its peak. The decline of LIAT during COVID and the preceding years prior to COVID, where because of the financial stress that LIAT had been continually under, born, of course, of two instances: lack of funding support from member states within the CARICOM region, and of course the increased demands for better pay and conditions from the pilots and other members of staff of LIAT, was certainly bringing LIAT under financial strain. The government of Antigua has always played its role in bringing some degree of amelioration to LIAT's problems. But within memorable time, LIAT 1974 Limited has changed its fleet twice. And of course, we have always argued from the government of Antigua's standpoint that a number of errors were made with LIAT, one of which was the liquidation of our senior shareholdings in LIAT by the former administration. When I say liquidation, we accepted less than, rather than convert our contributions to LIAT into shares. The former administration took preferential shares, which allowed another Caribbean state to have greater say at the shareholder level with LIAT. And I think that led to certainly a deterioration in Antigua's position as the central hub for LIAT. And that plus the other issues, financial issues, led to the decline of LIAT during COVID, when there was very much a shock to its revenue base. Having regard to all of that, the government of Antigua did indicate that it was going to continue to support the restoration of LIAT. LIAT 2020 has been registered. It has now been put in place. We are in furtive discussions with another private sector partner in Airpeace. In fact, the notes will indicate that the inaugural flight of Airpeace is going to arrive here in 2 days' time, well, in 1 day's time, tomorrow, where we would expect the chairman of Airpeace to be here as well to further the discussions. There are a number of events that will stem from that, not least of which would be the arrival of a cultural group from Nigeria to play a role in our summer festival. But there will certainly be cocktail receptions and so on. And we're hoping that out of this engagement with Airpeace, that we will get further, closer to the mark of ensuring that LIAT 2020 really does come alive in a new way. There's going to have to be an increase in the fleet of Lear 2020. And of course, we do believe that Lear 2020, with an expanded fleet and a resuscitation of its operations, will bring some of the fix that is required, because it will give consumers the options of having another carrier that they can rely on to move them from point A to B or from different points across the Caribbean. We note that Winair, and we also note that Caribbean Airlines have expanded their coverage in the sub-region. And again, these are all welcome developments, and I think what you will have are more options for the traveling and flying public in these circumstances. But we are certainly persevering along the path of ensuring that Lear 2020 comes alive with new shareholdings, with new investments, with new aircraft, and with greater participation in the airspace. And it's a matter of time, but we're pursuing it with relent at this point in time.
I think you've muted Elizabeth. Sorry, you're muted now. Could you unmute, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you now. Please go ahead.
All right. My final question to you, Minister Nicholas. Could you expound a little further on the basis for the decision of the Cabinet to appoint Mr. Dwayne George to the Senate? In light of, there's been mixed reactions within the social media sphere in particular about him crossing over. Could you expound a little more on the decision that was made to put him to the upper house?
Well, ultimately, the position that he seeks is a position in the lower house on behalf of the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party, and what better way for his public to be able to judge his prowess than to give him the earliest possible opportunity to be a sitting member of one of the houses and to see whether or not he is fit for purpose. You mentioned the whole issue of crossover, and I think that the United Progressive Party is making this their cause célèbre in terms of why their candidate should be preferred. And I would just want to dwell on this whole question of crossover, the history of politics in the Caribbean. In fact, the history of politics in the Western world has been it's a litany of persons who have provided adequate service to their country by, in one instance, changing from one political party to another political party. The most notorious of them all has been the former UK Prime Minister, who was considered the hero of World War II. So the whole question of, at the point in time when he had his opportunity to serve, from which party did he serve? I think the important litmus test would be, what value was he to the nation when he had the opportunity to serve? And I think the same is going to be true for Mr. George. Your humble servant, myself, has had a checkered past in terms of my getting to this point to be able to bring service to bear in the public. I was a member of 2 prior political parties before coming to the fold of the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party and before winning a seat in Parliament. In the UPP's ascent to office in 2004, the Honourable Errol Cott was a former member of the then outgoing Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party, and within 1 year of him breaking part with the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party, he became an elected member of the United Progressive Party. The Honourable Reuben Harris was a member of 2 prior political parties, the Progressive Labour Movement and the Antigua People's Party. And he too not only came into the fold of the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party, but the then Prime Minister, the Honourable V.C. Byrd, did elevate him back in the 1970s to the highest ministerial rank of Minister of Finance. And of course, he held some senior positions in the administration. This is not new, and I think the notion of trying to characterize the exposure of Mr. George as anything but he has offered himself to service to his community and the country, as anything that is in any way bad or harmful, is quite unfortunate, because, as I've said, from Winston Churchill all the way up to Errol Cott and Reuben Harris and myself and Chet Green and Dean Jonas, all of us have made a transition in the past. And political parties are to be seen as vehicles to be able to aid in the whole question of public administration. And I think Mr. George must be given his opportunity to be able to demonstrate his competence, which he will be granted that opportunity in the Senate in the first instance. And I think ultimately it's going to be up to the people of St. Mary's South to make the judgment as to whether or not he's fit for purpose. They would have had the benefit of seeing Mr. Kelvin Simon in the Parliament before, and so they will have an opportunity of seeing Mr. George in the upper house, and to be able to make an informed judgment as to who they think would be best suited for purpose. And I think that is part of the consideration of the administration of today.
Thank you very much, Minister Nicholas, and that ends my line of questioning to you this morning.
Welcome.
All right, Elizabeth, thank you so much. Let's go now over to Nikki Phoenix, then we'll go to Zoe Carlton. Nikki, good morning. Your 3 questions, please.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Minister Nicholas.
Good
I
morning.
want to stay on this
Good morning,
conversation we're having regarding Mr. Dwayne George. Mr. Dwayne George left the UPP just a few weeks ago. We just had a general elections, which is just about 6 months ago. Minister, you mentioned other individuals who might have crossed over within a year, but this individual crossed over within a couple of weeks. And the question basically is, which I have a couple of them, if I can sum it up so you can give a summarized response, is what service has Dwayne George offered to the ABLP to deserve such a promotion as a senator above and ahead all other qualified and dedicated long-serving supporters of the ABLP? And just to add to that question, isn't this move by Prime Minister Gaston Brown and his administration to nab this ex-UPP member an indication or a clear indication that his administration is seemingly creating 2 sets of supporters within the ABLP, which is the conversation on the ground, the Gastonites versus the Laborites?
I don't know that this question of Gastonite, that is a term coined by members of the United Progressive Party. I can tell you with 100% certainty that the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party is the only political party that in this country that has been able to infuse itself with competence and skills from wherever they present themselves in the communities. For those persons, and you may need to avail yourself of some history lessons of the political development in this country. There is a whole ream of examples that I could give you. But for the senior persons in the country, they would recall that there was a Speaker of the House by the name of Casford Murray. People will remember Senator Millicent Percival. People will remember the Honorable Christopher Manasseh Ahmad. These were all persons who came into the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party after its loss to the PLM in 1971, and they formed an integral and core part of the political apparatus of the revised and revamped Antigua Labour Party of 1976. And there are others. There are others who were former hostile members of antagonists of the Labour Party and have become ardent supporters even to this day in the scheme of things. This is politics 101. And these are what effective political parties do. What is important is that when you come on board, you adhere to the requirements of the thrust and the ethos of the political party. Both myself and Ambassador Hurst, who serve here in this panel, and forgive me if the discussion this morning is more of a political nature, but the questions are being asked, and I'm going to face up to them. We have said that as far back as the 1960s, when, after universal adult suffrage was achieved in 1955, the Antigua Labour Party had three bases on which it sought to move the country's development along. And it was in housing, education, and health. It continues to be the basis by which the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party continues to pursue the development of the country. Of course, it has put it more precisely in its own creed. That has become almost the things that each of us are required to do. So it doesn't matter from whence you've come. Are you capable of adapting to the creed of the Antigua Labour Party to see the country along this development path? And so you ask, what has Mr. George brought? Mr. George is a competent and trained professional. He is a trained economist. His last role in the public sector was as a lecturer at the Antigua State College. We believe that such a person of that level of competence and intellectual capability, should he be successful in the by-election, could be called upon to provide ministerial level of leadership within the government of Antigua and Barbuda. And that is what makes him attractive to us. Whatever his misgivings with the United Progressive Party leading up to the last general elections and beyond, it's a matter, I believe, that will become very clear to the people in the community, because I'm sure it's a question that he has to answer to them. And I'm quite satisfied, having had individual and even group discussions with him. He has a way of explaining those misgivings. But again, the fact that he's now come to the Antigua Labour Party, Barbuda Labour Party, and has an ambition to serve and has brought competence along with it is something that the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party finds very attractive. And there's a way that it is being said, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. We were going to see what happens in the lead up to the by-elections, which are due perhaps maybe in another 80 days or so, or even less, 60 to 80 days or so. So we shall see. But that is certainly the attraction of Mr. George to the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party. And if he wants to be a part of this august body that is responsible for so much development, we're giving him every opportunity to prove his mettle.
Minister Nicholas, the question is trust, building trust within the people of St. Mary's. And I understand a bit of political history, and I'm still learning, as you highlighted a few minutes ago. But we're talking about this particular individual, this particular situation, where we just had an election just a few months ago. This individual went hard against the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party, basically to ensure that Shuggie Simon secured his seat. Now, what is the response from the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party to your supporters to give them the confidence to trust you that the decision that you're making, you're bringing somebody who has never served, has never been a member of the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party, and you've promoted that person to a position as a senator?
But why is that a concern for you, Nikki? It is an internal party.
Sorry,
it's an internal.
Sir, it's a concern for the media and for the public, because I'm bringing the questions.
No,
from
I'm
the
saying this.
supporters
No, you're wrong. This is an internal party matter. I could give you 60 videos and photos of our engaging our members, both at the branch level and at the party level, on successive meetings we have last week. And we have put it on the table, and there has been overall general acceptance. There may still be one or two persons who may be scowling a little bit, but the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party, as I've indicated to you, is replete with significant examples of where this ingression had to be done. When I came on board the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party back in 2012, I relied on the support of persons like former Minister of Government Hugh Marshall, Hilroy Humphreys, Bernard Percival, and Sir Robin Yearwood, as even a current member of Parliament, to assist me with the whole question of engaging with the membership of the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party in St. John City East. And once they were satisfied that they were looking at someone to be at the spearhead of their fight, because they know the membership of the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party knows to their core what is the value of having the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party in government. They know it. And so all that they need to be persuaded is that this person is making a genuine commitment to the ideals of the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party, presents himself as an effective spearhead in a particular community and in a particular constituency to fight that fight. And I can assure you, Mr. Simon enjoys right now the overall support of the members of the Antigua Labour Party from St. Mary's South. I'm satisfied about that.
Okay, respectfully, Minister, you said it's a party matter, but this party in a by-election is going to the general public, the people of St. Mary's, to vote and to trust the ABLP and to trust Mr. Simon, who to some extent basically sold out himself and the people of the UPP or the supporters of the UPP for a senator position. But I don't want us to stay on that. I want to
Ms. Phoenix, I would, no, I'm not going to allow you to get away with that. Here is it, you're representing ZDK now. Who were you representing on this media panel 6 months ago? You had your reasons. We have, no. I am saying to you, what did you sell yourself for to ZDK? What did you sell? What did you sell yourself for to be working for ZDK? It is an inappropriate comment that you made.
I'm not sure how you're making that comparison.
I am making the comparison. I am making the comparison because you have taken it upon yourself to be judgmental. I have indicated to you why in the politics, in terms of providing adequate representation to persons, why the Antigua Labour Party has found Mr. George attractive in the wake of the resignation of Samantha Marshall. While we have found him attractive, he has competence. He has brought something to the table. He has now made a commitment to the Antigua Labour Party. We're going on with that. We are giving the people of St. Mary's South the opportunity to see him in the context by which he is now asking to be accorded their support. They want to see him in Parliament, and we're giving them an opportunity to do it. You're making it seem as if it's some, just a second, you'll allow me to answer the question. You're making it seem as if it's a transactional basis. You're coming in with perhaps maybe your own political slant that it is a sellout. And I'm asking you, 6 months ago, you were not representing ZDK and this Parliament. You are now representing ZDK. Ought we to assume that there was some subterfuge, that you were bought out by ZDK to be representing them? You have certainly found it necessary to make your services available to another media house, and that is okay and acceptable. Why should it be so different to Mr. George? And I want to put you on notice that I'm not going to allow you to use these procedures to bring nascent political arguments into this discussion. If you do it, I'm going to respond in kind.
That's fine, sir, and I'm responding to you respectfully. 6 months ago, I was not even in the media working for ZDK. I'm hired by ZDK, and when I sit here, I represent ZDK. So 6 months ago, I was not an observer or any other media house. So I didn't.
You never represented another media house. You never represented another media house.
3 years ago, I worked for Observer, sir, respectfully. But it's not about me. We're coming here and you're asking
questions. But it is about you. It is about you as well. Pardon? It is about you as well. When the media, when the media takes a position that it has a partisan political slant, it is about you as well. I think I want to address this matter because a lot of times people like yourselves, Nikki, assume that you can take pot shots at people who are in public office, like myself, and any others who aspire for political office, and then do not expect an equal response in political terms from those persons who you're attacking. And I'm saying to you, you are disingenuous by seeking to say that it was a transactional relation that Mr. George has sold himself. That's a term that you use. I find it objectionable because you asked a question before and I gave you the legitimate reason. Then you tried to speak on behalf of the membership of the Labour Party. I asked you, what does that have to do with you? I can give you evidence to show you that the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party membership, just like in my case in 2012, accepted me when I went forward to become their spearhead in St. John City East. The membership of St. Mary's South has accepted Mr. George based on the engagement that the political leadership of the Labour Party had. It has nothing to do with you. You may think it's a public issue. Where it comes a public issue is for the people of St. Mary's South. They're going to have to make the decision. And so that campaign is going to take place.
Mr. Nicholas, can I interject now? Because I guess we're just going to have a conversation about Mr. Dwayne George. These questions that you're receiving from me, I'm not a supporter of the UPP or the
It does
APLC.
seem so. It does seem so.
I'm a journalist. When I sit here and I ask these questions.
You speak like them.
One second, sir. I've given you the respect. If I can just have my little say and then you can respond. When you're asking questions, the government has made a decision. The ABLP has made a decision to nab an individual just a few weeks ago who was a member of the UPP. The public is not even sure if this senator, new senator, Dwayne George, is a member of the ABLP.
He is.
And the ABLP is a government. 1 second, so let me just wrap up quickly. The ABLP as a government making the decision of the day has removed Samantha Marshall, placed an ex-UPP individual in that position, and is asking the public to believe in this individual. Even if he wins his seat, he becomes a member of parliament, a minister in government, and this individual should be trusted, who was just a supporter of the UPP mere weeks ago. This is not personal. It's basic questions that the government should answer to the public.
Your appreciation for the evolution of politics in Antigua is limited. I'm saying that to you with all respect. In every respect, your appreciation of how this particular infusion of talent in any political party is limited. I was at the foundation of the removal of Errol Cott from the Antigua Labour Party, and when he was infused in the United Progressive Party. And it happened. And when the United Progressive Party made its case that they needed his talent and they needed his access and his resources, the members of St. John's Rural East of the United Progressive Party accepted that. They put him at the helm of the political process, and he did not defeat any ordinary political opponent. He defeated a standing prime minister, and he became the Minister of Finance in the United Progressive Party's government. So why is that any different to what now we're trying to do? That's the point I'm putting to you. And when you come and you phrase the question the way you have, you are speaking like someone who wants to pull the wool over the political affairs of this country to say that it has never happened before. It has happened as recent as the UPP's ascent in 2004 to government. And I'm saying this to you. And in 2012, when I left, when I resiled away from the creation or the development of the Organization for National Development, and I became a member of the Antigua Labour Party, that is exactly what happened again. And so what Mr. George is doing now falls in line with that. The Antigua Labour Party is a two-way process. We're interested in his talent, and he has an ambition to serve. And so we're taking it at that level, and we're going forward on that basis. It is ultimately going to be left to the people of St. Mary's South to make a decision as to whether or not they find that as an acceptable outcome. But that is the campaign that is going to take place in the coming weeks.
Yes, I didn't expect this to take up all of my time, and I know I usually get into trouble continuously with this. But can I ask one question surrounding the lands that the government spoke about?
Yes,
Garfield, Mr. Nicholas, is that okay?
Yes, sure.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the lands, Antigua Hangar Inc. owns 26.44 acres, and Calvinair owns 10 acres of the land. And just to be specific, the cabinet notes today pointed that point 4 is making a specific that the lands surrounding the shorelines at the airport is not what is being reacquired by the government. So my question would be, has the government begun consultations or negotiations with both Mr. Calvin Ayre and the owner of Antigua Hangars Inc.?
The clarification today was necessary because a number of our property owners outside of the confines of the airport, the fenced area of the airport, had raised the concern as to whether or not their properties were under this particular focus. And so I think the clarification was to ensure that it is only within the conterminous environment of the fenced area that the intention of the government, as indicated last week, that's where we intend to be. But insofar as initiating the process in terms of eminent domain, no, that has not yet taken place, but only from a policy standpoint that we've indicated that while it continues to be a security issue going forward, that we are going to be we are seeking to ensure that we can bring an end to these ongoing security challenges. One might even argue that it ought not to have been sold. Those lands ought not to have been sold in the first instance. But we're where we are, and that's always the starting point. You have to start from where you are.
Yes, certainly. I do have a letter in my possession from former Prime Minister Lester Bird, who is asking for the lands, or who agreed in 2017 for the lands to be returned to the government. and should not have been sold initially. Just one final question with regards to Mr. Alan Oyema, who is the CEO of Airpeace. Will he be coming on this flight? And it's mentioned in the cabinet notes that the flight will arrive on the 4th of August. However, the advertising and previous cabinet notes said 5th to the 9th. And additionally, final, will the media be invited to join the government on this welcoming of Airpeace inaugural flight to Antigua and Barbuda?
Whatever the government does, we've always done it transparently, Nikki. So I think once Mr. Oyema arrives here and we have our engagement with him, the next obvious engagement, because we're doing it on behalf of the public, we have nothing to hide. I'm sure that there will be an opportunity. I'm not the person at the helm of the organizing arrangements. That responsibility falls to Ambassador Davin Joseph, but I'm sure that within the context of Mr. Oyema's visit and the engagement we need to have with him about LEA 2020, that opportunities will be provided for press engagement.
All right. Thank you so much, Minister Nicholas and Garfield. Always a pleasure.
All right, thanks, Nikki. Even though I didn't quite expect that you would have asked that very last one, because I hope that I was thinking that the penultimate one you asked was the final one. But
my apologies.
All right, let's go finally now over to Zoe Carlton. Zoe is with Zoe is an independent journalist. Zoe, your three questions, please.
Thank you. I will keep it very short necessarily. I'd like to just ask a little more about, Nikki started talking about Airpeace and Mr. Alan Oyema. And I just wanted to ask the Minister, are you happy that we now have procedures in place so that such an incident as happened before will not happen? Because Airpeace is actually selling one-way tickets on its website. So are we sure that these people, these 200 people who are coming in, are going to be leaving with return tickets?
The arrangements that are being put in place, even yesterday there was an engagement between Ambassador Davin Joseph and his organizing team and the members of the Immigration Department, where discussions are in high gear in relation to ensuring that we do not have any untoward experiences as we've had with the previous charters coming in under the banner of Antigua Airways or the other spurious operator. But certainly we have looked at the experiences that we've had in December last year and are seeking to put measures in place to avoid that. This is the engagement that we want to have. Antigua wants to have a relationship with Airpeace. We want to establish an air bridge between ourselves and that part of the world. We have seen where the Africa Exim Bank, our Afri-Exim Bank, has indicated that they are interested in this type of economic development. We know of at least one other Caribbean territory, Barbados to be specific, that are interested in wooing Airpeace into their jurisdiction. So as the saying goes, much used in law, carpe diem, we expect to beat the iron while it is hot, and certainly we're interested in ensuring that Mr. Oyema, who is himself a CIP citizen of Antigua and Barbuda, will engage with us in a manner that will cause us to achieve the outcomes that we want, both the engagement with LEA, the equity participation in LEA 2020, and of course the establishment of an international air bridge between ourselves and West Africa.
Thank you, sir. To Mr. Alan Oyema himself, is the Cabinet concerned that Mr. Alan Oyema is still under suspicion of $20 million fraud and money laundering, and the FAA and the CAA are deeply concerned about the safety, and have been a number of incidents with the planes of Airpeace?
It certainly has not prevented Airpeace from flying into and out of the UK. Being under suspicion, does not, to our mind, making an invalid investor. In fact, you see right now that a former US president is undergoing criminal indictments in the United States. If former President Trump were to travel to Antigua, for vacation, I'm sure he will come with the U.S. Secret Service. I mean, I think sometimes we have a way of treating ourselves as less than equal to the task. Should anything happen in relation to the integrity of Mr. Alan Ayama and the future of his airline, then of course those circumstances will unfold in the hour. But there are risks associated with doing anything that we are going to do, and so we want to do them. And we are persuaded that the greater the risk, the higher the reward, which is not to say that we are reckless, but we can't think of a better airline. And there are two competing airlines out of Africa. There's Mr. Ayama's airline, Air Peace, and of course there is the Ethiopian Airlines. Those are the two most established airlines in that part of the world. And we are satisfied that we have in place a competent partner, and we have to go below the level of the noise and to be able to have the kind of engagement at the end of the day that will bring us the result that we want.
I have a quick question about CIP.
Just let me make one final point on this matter, Zoe. And we have to be aware as well that Air Peace, as a corporate person, is indeed a different person to Mr. Ayama, even its chairman and its founder. And so the organization of a corporate person could well survive any challenge that an individual officer of the company could become circumscribed by. So I want to make it very clear that we're dealing with it on a corporate level, and we are satisfied that we have something to work with here, both with Mr. Ayama and with his airline.
Thank you, sir. I have a very quick question about CIP. I have to say I'm a little bit confused. The EU is now trying to make life very difficult, but if British citizens with a British passport can obviously enter Europe without a visa, but they can't go through the Schengen space without a passport, is this issue with Schengen and visa in Europe a real driver for people who want to become citizens of Antigua and Barbuda? And if so, is that really the right motive to become a citizen of this country?
I believe there was a bit of a warping with your voice a while ago, Zoe, but could you attempt to just repeat it and to just do it for me a little slow, because I think I'm getting a bit of up and down in terms of the volumes. Could you repeat that?
I'm afraid the connection down here is extremely bad, sir. My question was, are people who are becoming to investing in CIP in Antigua and Barbuda, is access to Europe one of the things that drives people? Does it make so much difference to the people who are applying for citizenship?
It may well be, and one of the areas that we're looking at as well, it's our own residency program. We're seeking to enhance our residency program, which will give another option of persons who would want to be able to have alternative means to some of their own homegrown passports. And it is an attractive feature for them that with an Antiguan passport, they're able to have visa-free access to many parts of Europe. And should that window of opportunity close, would the passport be as valid to them, or would it be as attractive for would-be new persons as it was in the past when we had Schengen-free access? That is the $2 million question. And I dare say, as I've answered the question to Mr. Emmanuel, our challenge right now is to continue to diversify our economic base and our tax base to ensure that that buttress that has been provided, and the budgetary support that we had from the CIP since 2014, should those revenues dissipate, we need to have alternatives to be able to continue to provide the development process that we have been pursuing all along. So we have to do many things, and we have to do many things in concert with each other. We are going to protect the CIP program. We believe that it is as secure as they can be. We will continue to engage in an influential manner with the EU Commission. We will continue to engage with all of our other partners in the business, be the Caribbean Impacts or the United States as well, to ensure that our program meets those security requirements. And we will share with anyone and be open and transparent with what the measures that we have in place to protect other countries who are participating with us and to protect their borders as well from any untoward persons who would want to exploit a CIP passport to be able to do anything nefarious. So we have put those measures in place. We are satisfied that they're as secure as they can be. And if outside of our control, the veil should come down on these CIP programs. The challenge would be, how do we continue to raise the revenues to fund our development by other means?
Thank you, Minister. My final question is, there is what has been described as a youth mental health crisis. Obviously, a lot of young people suffering real mental health problems. Obviously, we see manifesting in guns, in violence, and all sorts of things. Is the Cabinet considering additional resources and support and aid for young persons with mental health problems?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we've made a call already. What with the increase in violence that we would have seen manifest with the porting of machetes and the type of attacks that we had seen more recently at some of the facilities where our young people gather. We did indicate that through the Ministry of Social Services, Social Transformation, the Ministry of Education, and indeed the police, that we would expect to be working collaboratively to be able to address this. If there are, outside of all of that, prevention mechanism, there's the need to incorporate other aspects of social welfare, to include counseling in the general mental health of these young people. It will be something that the government would be interested in. I can see that this framework becoming even larger, because we have to consider other NGOs as well. Certainly the churches, we think, have a role to play. And of course, parents, as ever, are the base and foundation of raising the children. But I think the media is going to have to play a role as well. I think that there can be an even better level of self-regulation in the media. Certainly, I have witnessed over the past several months media houses that have just been reckless in what they make available on the public airwaves in terms of some of the type of music and cultural content that they carry. And so we all have to play a role in this, in certainly helping to cure our future. Because if these young people who become ultimately our future become more and more deteriorated, then certainly we do not have a future. So again, yes, we are interested, and we will work in collaboration with any and everyone who brings a solution or part of the solution to bear around the table.
Thank you, sir. Enjoy the rest of Carnival.
Well, thank you, such as it is. I have not been to any of the shows yet. I hope to be taking one or two of the events this weekend. Certainly Panorama and perhaps maybe one or two of the FETs, but I don't know yet. We are certainly on and I might use this opportunity to announce that we are on a break from Cabinet for the next 2 weeks. It is traditional that we take a break from the task of the Cabinet. So for the next 2 weeks, we will be on a bit of a recess. So there'll be no Cabinet press briefing next week. And yeah, I'll take the opportunity to have some fun and relaxation over the remainder of the Carnival. And hopefully we can all keep safe. I'd just like to make one final comment, Garfield, before we close. And that at point 8 on the notes, we were notified yesterday in Cabinet of the passing of Dr. Ruby Lake Richards. Dr. Ruby Lake Richards was celebrated last year as not only one of our neurocentenarian in the diaspora, but she was honored by the UE along with Dr. Alfred Walwyn as part of the initial cohort of 1948, two of the first medical doctors that were produced by the University of West Indies. Dr. Ruby Lake Richards is the wife of our former ambassador and grandfather to our current Prime Minister, Mr. Richards. And so she lived in Canada, and we were notified yesterday during our cabinet proceedings that she has passed. And just like we would have done for Dr. Reginald Alfred Walwyn, the cabinet made a decision yesterday because the family has already indicated that she's going to be flown home, that she will be afforded an official funeral. So we'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of the cabinet to wish the Prime Minister and all of her family here, surviving families here in Antigua, our sincerest condolences on the passing of Dr. Ruby Lake Richards. Right? That having been said, I know we had an extended session today. It was my privilege to be here for these 2 hours, but I think it was necessary that I impinge myself on your program today, Garfield, to ensure that the public could be served with information by the police as to the circumstances leading to the demise of Mr. Manny James, I believe his last name is, and to his family, on behalf of the cabinet as well. We express condolences, and we are hopeful that the investigation that will follow will bring clarity and will certainly serve to bring some degree of closure and peace to the family of Mr. Manny James. Thank you for being with us, and I look forward, when we resume cabinet, to being with you once more. Enjoy the rest of the Carnival celebrations.
Well, thanks to you as well, Minister. Minister Nicholas is Minister for Information, as well as Information, Communications, Technology, Public Utilities and Energy. Ambassador Hurst, who's normally here on a Thursday, not here today, of course, because he made way for earlier joining us, Superintendent Lisbourne Michael, the Operations Officer of the Criminal Investigations Department, the CID, who, of course, handled the first part of our proceedings, the first segment, focusing on, of course, the police's response to that incident on Monday night, which resulted in the death of Manny James. All right, our thanks to you for joining us, whether you joined us on air or online. And let me thank my colleagues who joined us this morning. Of course, quite a few journalists, perhaps one of the most packed Skype profiles this morning in terms of we had Zoe Carlton, an independent journalist, Nikki Phoenix from ZDK, Robert Manuel from Observer Media Group, Elizabeth Fain from Pointville Communications, Kieran Murdoch from Twin Island, and joining us briefly as well, at least for recording purposes, was Alicia George from Island Press Box. My name is Garfield Burford. Good morning.